At 52, Carmen Davis had built a life of discipline and success. Yet, on one fateful morning, the stability she had so carefully crafted came crashing down. "Everything's booked, love. You just focus on getting better," her husband, Greg, said as he zipped up their luggage. They were heading for a family vacation, but Carmen wouldn't be joining them. She lay in a hospital bed, immobilized by a massive stroke that had struck without warning. With the family safely on their flight, Carmen called her lawyer, setting her affairs in order while they traveled. When they returned, tan and refreshed from their getaway, they would find something unexpected waiting for them. The morning sun filtered through the light curtains of the kitchen in their spacious home in suburban Chicago. Carmen's daughter, Leah, sat at the kitchen counter, absorbed in her phone as Carmen moved about the kitchen, making breakfast. She cracked eggs and stirred the grits, her mind constantly flicking back to the hospital, where she had been for the past 2 weeks. She had always been strong, organized, and methodical, traits that had earned her a solid career as a financial planner for a prestigious firm. Leah's voice pulled Carmen back into the moment. "Mom, can you lend me $2,000? The agency is dragging its feet with my commission, and I need to pay for some things." Leah didn't even glance up from her screen. "Transferred," Carmen replied without hesitation, tapping her banking app. It was a routine exchange. She had been doing this for years, financing her daughter's lifestyle without question. Greg entered the room, his hair still damp from the shower, wearing his old university sweatshirt. He looked worn, exhausted from the responsibilities of family life. "Morning, Carmen," he muttered, sitting down at the table. Carmen nodded, setting his cup of coffee in front of him, a soft sigh escaping her lips. The family dynamic was shifting. "Don't forget, I can't pick you up later," she reminded him, keeping her tone firm. "I have an important meeting." "Fine, I'll take Marta," Greg said, deflating as usual under her gaze. Carmen quickly turned her attention back to the eggs on the stove. The routine was familiar, comforting even. But just as she was about to add the seasoning, Leah spoke up again. "Mom, have you reconsidered helping me with the down payment for the new SUV? My old car is barely running anymore." Carmen paused, glancing at Leah. She knew this conversation well. "We've talked about this before. I just paid for your trip to the Bahamas last month. But you know how important my image is at the agency, Mom," Leah persisted. "A new car will help me attract more high-end clients. How can I do that in my old SUV? "Leah," Carmen said, a sharp edge entering her voice, "this conversation is over. You've already had more than enough." Her daughter met her eyes, her pout a familiar one. Carmen held her ground, though her resolve firm. Just then, Carmen's younger son, 24-year-old Sam, burst into the kitchen. A recent law school graduate, Sam had already cycled through a series of jobs, none of which had stuck. He was currently a junior paralegal, though he claimed his dream was to make it as a top-tier litigator. "Hey, Mom, you're a lifesaver," Sam greeted, kissing her on the cheek. "Thanks for the transfer earlier. I pulled my documents and I'm starting at a new firm tomorrow, again," Carmen asked, trying to hide the exhaustion in her voice. "We talked about sticking with one place. Sam, at least give it a few months. This one's different, Mom," Sam said quickly, his enthusiasm never dimming. "They're offering partnership down the line." "This is a real opportunity," Carmen just nodded, checking the time. "I've got to run soon," she said, grabbing her bag. "You guys need to handle the chores while I'm gone." Greg, Leah, and Sam all muttered affirmative replies, but Carmen knew it wouldn't be done. She had learned long ago that her role in the family was that of the organizer, the one who made sure everything ran smoothly, even when no one else seemed to care. As the day unfolded, Carmen's mind remained on the stroke that had changed her life. It had been only a few weeks, but the path ahead was daunting. She had always been the one taking charge, pushing her family forward, but now she had to come to terms with the fact that her body had betrayed her. Carmen's life in the following days became a whirlwind of meetings, hospital visits, and never-ending phone calls. The stroke had taken much from her mobility, her ability to speak clearly, and the rhythm of her once carefully scheduled life. Yet, in the midst of it all, she clung to what she knew best: work. Back at her office, the hum of conference calls and the flurry of emails felt foreign. Carmen was used to leading her team with a clear head, making decisions without hesitation. Now, with her own body betraying her, she could barely keep up with the demands of her clients and her firm. But there was no option to slow down. The expectations hadn't changed. She was the same Carmen, the financial expert, the one who could save her clients from disastrous investments, the one with all the answers. But inside, she was crumbling. By noon, Carmen had barely spoken to anyone except the hospital staff. Her clients were demanding attention, but her mind kept wandering back to her family. Every time she thought of them, a pang of guilt and frustration shot through her chest. She had always been the one who took care of everything: their finances, their needs, even their desires. Yet, in her time of need, they had gone off to vacation without her. That was the moment Carmen realized she had been a resource to them, not a person. Later that day, after finishing a particularly tense call with a client, Carmen found herself lost in thought on the train ride home. The rhythmic clatter of the train against the tracks was a lullaby of sorts. She couldn't shake the image of her family, happily enjoying their vacation without her. The picture-perfect resort photos Leah had sent from the Maldives only served to deepen the ache. They were living their lives, while hers had come to a screeching halt. I need to give them something, Carmen thought. She gazed at the images, imagining a future where they all finally came together, unified and whole. A dream, she mused. A distant hope. Perhaps, in a few months, they would all remember why they loved each other. She had been so consumed with work, so focused on providing for everyone, that she had failed to see the strain in her relationships. Her health had deteriorated, but it wasn't just the stroke that was crippling her. It was the realization that her family no longer saw her as a partner, but as a financial provider. When Carmen walked into her home that evening, the silence greeted her. The sound of the TV blaring from the living room was a stark contrast to the emptiness she felt inside. No one was home. Not that she expected them to be. She wasn't part of their world anymore. Not the world they enjoyed so freely, without the burden of responsibility. They had moved on. With a sigh, Carmen began the household chores. There was no point in waiting. She'd long accepted that her role in the family had been reduced to keeping everything in order, but tonight she wasn't sure if she had the strength to do it all. She was exhausted, mentally and physically. As she completed the usual routine, the thoughts that had been festering in the back of her mind started to surface. How had everything gotten so out of balance? The stress was eating away at her. What had happened to the family she had worked so hard to create? Why had she let herself become invisible? By the time Carmen made it back to the office, she felt an unexpected weight on her shoulders. The physical exhaustion had set in, and yet she couldn't stop herself from pushing forward. It had been a couple of weeks since the stroke, but the disorientation remained, the dizziness, the fatigue. Her speech had started to improve, but it was slow. Every word felt like a fight. Every task took more effort than it had before. Her daughter Leah's constant requests for money had also begun to wear on her nerves. It wasn't just the asking, it was the expectation that she would always say yes. It was as if Leah, and even Greg, believed she existed solely to fulfill their needs. And Carmen had done that for years. Her entire life had been about giving time, energy, money, and love. But now, as she sat in her office, reviewing the stack of bills and requests from her family, Carmen began to question the cost. Was she giving too much? Later that day, she found herself thinking about a trip, a gift to her family that would bring them all together. It had started as an impulse after she saw an advertisement for an exclusive resort in the Maldives. White sand beaches, overwater bungalows, turquoise water, everything that seemed so far from her reality. For a brief moment, Carmen let herself imagine the family together again, in the sun, laughing, carefree. For the first time since her stroke, Carmen made a decision that felt entirely hers. She booked the trip. Every detail was planned down to the last minute: flights, accommodations, transfers, insurance. She was paying for it all, of course. It would be their perfect family vacation. It would be her gift to them. But even as she made the arrangements, a small part of her knew that it was a gift that came with strings attached. What would they do when they found out? Would they even appreciate it? Or would it just be another way for them to take from her? The days leading up to the trip were a blur. Carmen's life, once marked by balance and precision, had devolved into chaos, even as her body struggled to recover from the stroke. She threw herself into preparing for the family getaway. It became an obsession, a glimmer of hope that, perhaps, this trip would help mend the fractures in her family's relationships. After all, nothing could bring a family closer than a dream vacation, right? Solange, her daughter, was preoccupied with making sure everything about the trip looked perfect. She was obsessed with swimwear, designer beachwear, and keeping her social media presence pristine. It was the same routine. Carmen, always the one behind the scenes, made the arrangements. The family expected everything to be seamless. That was her job. But there was something different in the air this time. 2 days before their departure, Solange approached her with a request that stopped Carmen in her tracks. "Mom, there's just one more thing. Can I bring my boyfriend, Trey? He's been great, and we're serious, you know. I mean, we've been together for months now. He'll pay for his own ticket." "But we need a spot in the villa." Carmen blinked, her mind racing. For a split second, she thought about saying no. After all, it was supposed to be a family vacation. Just them. But before she could speak, Solange added, "I mean, it's just for us, right? We can make it work." Carmen felt a stir of frustration, but she knew better than to show it. Over the years, she had sacrificed so much of herself for this family, and here they were, asking for more. She hadn't asked for anything in return, hadn't expected anything, really, but still. "This was different. We've discussed this, Solange. It's a family trip," Carmen replied firmly, her voice steady, though her mind raced with anger and confusion. "We can't just invite whoever. The villa is only meant for people. But Mom, he's practically part of the family. You don't understand," Solange pressed, her voice turning whiny. "You know how important it is for me to look a certain way at work. Image matters, and this would be the perfect way to show that I have my life together. Plus, Trey's been supportive of everything." Carmen's eyes narrowed slightly as she looked at her daughter. She knew what was really going on. Solange was using this trip to further her own agenda, the same way she always did. The family wasn't her priority. Appearance, success, and status were. That was what really mattered to her. "No," Carmen said softly but firmly. "I've already told you my decision." She could feel her daughter's eyes boring into her, trying to push for more, but Carmen was resolute. Her patience was wearing thin. Leah left the room, her expression hardened. The argument, though subdued, was a reminder of how disconnected they had become. The day of the trip finally arrived. Carmen's entire family, minus one, was packed and ready for the vacation she had worked so hard to give them. She looked at them, her husband, Greg, always a little worn out by life, her daughter, Leah, full of youthful energy, and her son, Sam, whose future was always just beyond reach. She could hardly contain the bittersweet emotion bubbling inside her. They didn't know how hard she had worked, how much she had sacrificed to get them here, but her thoughts were interrupted as she made her way to the kitchen. Carmen had set the table for breakfast, as usual. The warmth of the morning sun illuminated the space, but her heart felt cold. "Mom, it's so awesome that we get to go," Sam said as he plopped down at the table, still half-dressed and looking somewhat disheveled. "I can't believe this is happening." Carmen smiled faintly, not answering him right away. She didn't have the energy for this small talk. The day had already drained her, and the pressure to make everything perfect was starting to feel suffocating. As the family gathered around the table, enjoying their last morning at home before the trip, Carmen couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. They were happy, but it wasn't the joy she had imagined. It wasn't the coming together she had worked so hard to make happen. Solange, who had always been the first to grab her phone, was already checking in with her boyfriend, Trey. Carmen watched as her daughter typed out messages with quick fingers. Leah didn't even acknowledge her presence as she passed the coffee cup. "Mom," Solange began, looking up for a moment. "I just want you to know I really appreciate this. I know I'm hard on you, but you've really helped me build this life. This trip means a lot." Carmen forced a smile, but the hollow feeling in her chest only grew. Was it too late to fix this? She longed to turn back time, to have them all be together in a way that truly mattered. But for now, all she could do was put on a brave face and send them off. They had a trip to take, and that was the priority. Her family's happiness was her only goal, but the universe had other plans. 3 days before they were due to fly out, Carmen's body gave out. It started as a vague feeling, a weakness in her arm, a slight numbness creeping down her right side. She had been pushing herself harder than ever before, juggling work, family, and the expectations of those around her. But the moment it hit, Carmen knew something was terribly wrong. Her vision blurred, her balance faltered, and her right arm went completely numb. She tried to move, to call out, but her voice failed her. All she could manage was a weak cry for help. "Greg," she whispered, the words coming out garbled, distorted. Her body refused to obey. Her vision darkened. Her heart raced as the reality of the situation set in. She was having a stroke. Greg rushed in, and panic erupted. He was there, but it felt too late. Carmen collapsed, unable to move, unable to speak. Carmen barely remembers the moments that followed her collapse. There was pain, confusion, and an overwhelming sense of helplessness as the paramedics worked swiftly, trying to stabilize her. The world around her blurred, and she could barely comprehend the urgency in their voices. When she finally opened her eyes again, she found herself in the cold, sterile light of a hospital room. The beeping of machines was a constant reminder that she was no longer in control of her body. Her right side was completely paralyzed. The weight of it all settled in her chest as she tried to speak, but the words didn't come. All she could do was look up at the unfamiliar ceiling, feeling the numbness spread from her arm to her entire right side. Greg sat by her side, his hand resting gently on hers, his face pale with worry. Solange and Sam had arrived soon after, but their faces were tense. There was no immediate relief, no promise of comfort. Carmen saw their concern, but something was missing. She had always been the one to hold the family together, but now they seemed like strangers, unsure of how to comfort her. Hours passed, or maybe days. Time felt distorted in the hospital. The only real clarity came when a nurse entered the room, checking her vitals, making small talk that felt too disconnected from Carmen's reality. Her world had changed in an instant. It wasn't until much later that the doctor spoke to Greg, his voice grim as he outlined Carmen's condition. "She's in critical condition," the doctor said, "but stable for now. The next 24 hours are crucial. She's suffered a major ischemic stroke, affecting the middle cerebral artery. We'll start treatment, but we can't predict how much recovery she'll have." Carmen lay there, unable to speak, unable to ask the questions that swirled in her mind. What would happen to her? Would she ever be the same again? And as she drifted in and out of consciousness, another truth began to settle in her mind. Everything she had done, everything she had sacrificed for her family, now seemed so distant. What was the point of all of it if this was how they would respond? The next morning, Carmen felt herself slowly returning to some semblance of awareness. She had regained some control over her vision and could faintly make out the shape of her husband sitting in the chair beside her bed. But the world around her felt like a dream, distant, surreal, and impossible to grasp. When Greg looked at her, she could see the concern etched deep into his features. But there was something else in his eyes, too, an unreadable expression that Carmen couldn't place. Her mind raced as she tried to piece together the last few days. Then it hit her, the trip to the Maldives. The vacation her family was so excited about, the one she had worked so hard to plan. The trip that would leave her behind. She tried to speak, to ask him about it, but only a soft, strained gasp escaped her lips. She could barely move her mouth. Greg looked at her helplessly, a flicker of discomfort passing across his face. "They've gone, Carmen," he said quietly, his voice low. "The kids are already packed. They'll be on the plane in a few hours. I can't stay with you. I need to go with them. You're stable, the doctors are confident. I'll be back soon." Carmen's heart sank as he spoke. A wave of betrayal washed over her, colder than anything she had ever felt. Her family, her own blood, was leaving her behind. The decision had already been made. Carmen, the person who had given everything for them, who had been the rock of their lives, was now nothing more than an afterthought. They would go on with their vacation without her. The realization hit her like a cold slap across the face. You're leaving me?" Carmen managed to whisper, her voice barely audible. Greg hesitated, his hand still resting on hers, but he didn't look her in the eye. "I'll make sure everything's okay with you, Carmen. You'll have the best care. Don't worry, we'll be back soon. I need to go with them." Her throat tightened, and she wanted to scream. She wanted to beg him to stay, to put her first for once. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she nodded slowly, her mind reeling as Greg left to join the rest of the family. Carmen was left in that cold, sterile room. She realized then, more clearly than ever, that she had spent her whole life putting others first, her family, her clients, her career. She had done everything for them, and in return, they abandoned her at her most vulnerable moment. But that moment also marked the beginning of something new. Carmen wasn't going to let this define her. She might have been paralyzed, but her mind was still sharp. And as the days stretched into weeks, a new resolve began to form. This illness, this betrayal, was not the end of her story. It was the beginning of a new chapter. As Carmen's health slowly improved, so did her mental clarity. Her speech was still slurred, and she struggled to move her right arm, but with each passing day, there was a small victory. The physical therapist worked with her tirelessly, helping her regain movement in her limbs, pushing her to reach beyond what she thought was possible. But the real breakthrough came when Carmen found herself alone in her hospital room one evening, staring out the window at the setting sun. The sounds of the busy hospital faded into the background as she realized something profound. She had spent too long living for others. She had given everything to her family, and they had taken it without gratitude. But she didn't need them to define her. She could be more than just their caretaker, their provider. She could reclaim her own life. In the silence of the hospital room, Carmen made a decision. She would no longer be defined by her role in her family. She would take control of her future. And with that decision, she felt something shift within her, a newfound strength, a spark of independence that had been buried for years. Months passed. And Carmen's recovery continued at a slow but steady pace. She worked with her doctors, her physical therapist, and a speech coach, determined to regain as much of herself as possible. But more importantly, she began to rebuild her life, to make decisions for herself. One day, she received a call from her lawyer. The family's power of attorney had been revoked. It was clear that Carmen's husband and children had seen her as nothing more than a provider, an asset to be managed. But Carmen had taken control. The power of attorney was now in her hands. It was time to protect her assets, to rebuild her future on her own terms. With the help of her attorney, Carmen began to revise her will, to set aside funds for a future where she could do more than just survive. She wanted to give back, to help other stroke victims reclaim their lives the way she was reclaiming hers. She knew what it felt like to lose everything, but she also knew what it felt like to fight for what truly mattered, herself. Carmen's new life was just beginning. Carmen spent the following months in intense recovery, but this time it was different. She wasn't just fighting to get her old life back. She was fighting for a new life, one that was hers to shape, independent of anyone else's expectations. With each passing day, her right side began to show signs of improvement. Her right hand, once completely limp, could now grip objects, albeit weakly. She could walk short distances with the aid of a cane, though it was still an effort. Her speech, once garbled and slow, began to sharpen. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. It was progress, and for the first time in months, Carmen felt hope. During this period, Carmen found herself reflecting on her relationships. Especially with her family, it had been hard at first to accept the truth that her children and husband had abandoned her in a time of crisis. But as she worked to rebuild her body, she also worked on something more difficult, rebuilding her emotional resilience. One afternoon, as Carmen sat in the cozy living room of her new apartment, a place she had moved into after leaving the family home, she received a call from her son, Sam. He had been distant for months, and Carmen was unsure of what to expect. "Hey, Mom," Sam's voice sounded hesitant. "I've been thinking about everything that happened. I want to apologize. I know I wasn't there for you. I wasn't there when you needed me the most. And I wanted to tell you that I'm sorry." Carmen paused, the weight of his words sinking in. It wasn't the apology she had imagined. There were no grand gestures, no heartfelt confessions. But it was enough. She could hear the sincerity in his voice, the regret that had built up in him over time. "I appreciate you saying that, Sam," Carmen replied, her voice steady but full of emotion. "But this is something you have to understand for yourself. You have to realize what you're capable of, without relying on me to fix everything for you." The conversation ended quietly, with a sense of closure that Carmen hadn't anticipated. It was the first step in her journey toward healing the fractures in her family. But it was also the beginning of her understanding that she couldn't be the solution to everyone's problems anymore. She had her own life to live now. Months passed, and as Carmen continued to thrive in her new life, the center flourished. The patients she worked with found inspiration in her story, and she became a beacon of hope for many. She had fought her way through the darkest times, and now she was helping others do the same. Her relationship with Solange deepened. The two of them were learning how to support each other in ways they never had before. And as for Greg, their new connection wasn't perfect, but it was real. They weren't going to pretend that things could go back to what they once were. Instead, they were building something new, something rooted in mutual respect. Carmen had also reconnected with her old friends, rekindling relationships that had faded over the years. She found joy in these smaller, quieter moments where she wasn't the one expected to fix everything, but simply to be present. On a bright morning in late spring, Carmen stood in front of the window of her apartment, watching the city come alive beneath her. For the first time in years, she wasn't looking back at what she had lost. Instead, she was focused on the future, a future that was hers to create. With no one else's expectations to define her, the phone rang, breaking. Her thoughts, it was Amira calling with an update on the center. Carmen, Amira said, her voice full of excitement. I just spoke with a major donor. They're offering a large grant to expand the center. We're going to be able to reach so many more people. Carmen felt a smile tug at the corners of her lips. She could hear the pride in Amira's voice. But more than that, she could feel the pride in herself. This was her doing. She had made this happen. The future was waiting, and Carmen was ready. As Carmen looked out over the horizon, she couldn't help but think back on everything that had happened. She had lost so much: her health, her trust in her family, her sense of purpose. But in losing it all, she had found something far more valuable. Herself. She had learned the hard way that life was fragile and that happiness couldn't be found in what you gave to others. True happiness came from living authentically, embracing the hard truths, and learning to stand on your own 2 feet. It was something Carmen had finally achieved. And with that realization, she felt free. Greg had always been a quiet presence in Carmen's life. After the stroke, their relationship had been strained, and Carmen had to come to terms with the fact that their marriage had been built on fragile foundations. The distance between them had grown, and Carmen had made peace with the possibility that their relationship might never return to what it once was. But life, as Carmen had learned, wasn't about going backward. It was about moving forward, and in time, she found herself having conversations with Greg that were far more honest than they had ever been before. Slowly, their connection began to shift from something codependent to something more grounded and respectful. One evening, after another long day at the center, Greg showed up at Carmen's apartment unexpectedly. He had called earlier, but Carmen had been in a meeting, so she hadn't heard from him until now. Can we talk? Greg asked, his face softened by the wear of years, but there was a new vulnerability in his voice. Carmen nodded, gesturing to the couch. As he sat down, Carmen poured them both some tea, her heart beating a little faster than usual. This wasn't the kind of conversation they had often had before. It felt different, deeper. I've been doing a lot of thinking, Greg began, his hands nervously fidgeting, about everything. About us, about you, and about how I treated you when you were in the hospital. I thought I was doing what was best, going to the Maldives with the kids, but looking back, I see how selfish I was. You were fighting for your life, and I wasn't there for you. Carmen's heart ached as she listened, but she also felt something else, a deep relief. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was an apology nonetheless. I know I can't change what happened, Greg, she said gently, but I think we can both learn from it. I can't go back to being the person I was, the one who always put everyone else's needs first. I need to take care of myself now. Greg nodded. I get that, and I want to be a part of whatever comes next. Carmen, I don't know if we can fix everything, but I want to start fresh. And if you're open to it, I'd like to try. Carmen felt a lump form in her throat. I'm not sure what that looks like yet, Greg, but I'm willing to see where it goes. And for the first time in a long while, Carmen realized that she didn't need to know everything. She didn't need to have all the answers. Life was unpredictable, but she was no longer afraid of it. For the first time, Carmen was in control of herself, her future, and her relationships. It had been over a year since Carmen's stroke, and the woman who had once been the backbone of her family was now standing at the forefront of a community, the New Horizons Stroke Recovery Center. A place that embodied everything Carmen had fought for: strength, resilience, and recovery. Despite her personal growth, Carmen's relationships with her family still required healing. Her children had visited her more regularly, but it had never been the same. They respected her newfound strength, but old habits die hard, and there were still moments of friction. Carmen had come to realize that it was up to her to set the tone for these relationships, not just for herself, but for her family. One afternoon, as the center was closing, Carmen received a surprise visit. It was Solange, her daughter. She had called earlier in the day, but Carmen had been busy with a support group at the center, so the meeting had been set up on a whim. Carmen wasn't sure what to expect, but part of her welcomed the opportunity. Solange entered, her eyes scanning the center with a mixture of awe and something else Carmen couldn't quite place. As her daughter walked towards her, Carmen stood up from behind her desk, giving her a warm, if somewhat cautious, smile. "Mom, this place. It's amazing," Solange said, her voice unexpectedly sincere. She paused, as if gathering her thoughts. "I see now what you've built, and I think I finally understand what you've been going through." Carmen nodded, trying to hide the emotions stirring inside her. "It's not just about what I've been through. It's about everyone who walks through those doors," she said softly. "It's about giving people a second chance, helping them rebuild their lives." Solange bit her lip, clearly struggling with something. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened when you were in the hospital, the trip. I'm sorry, Mom, I didn't get it. I was so wrapped up in my own world, and I didn't realize how much I hurt you." Carmen looked at her daughter, seeing the sincerity in her eyes. She hadn't expected this apology, but it was everything she needed. It was the closure that had eluded her for so long. "I know." "Solange," Carmen replied, her voice a mixture of relief and pain. "But it's not just about the trip or the stroke. It's about understanding that my needs matter too. I've been living for everyone else for so long that I lost sight of myself." Solange looked down for a moment before meeting Carmen's gaze. "You're right, and I think I've been so focused on trying to live up to some image that I never thought about the consequences. You've always been there for me, but I've never really been there for you, have I?" Carmen reached out and placed a hand on her daughter's. "It's never too late, Solange. We both have a lot to learn, but as long as we keep moving forward, we'll get there." Solange smiled softly, her eyes a little teary. "I want to help you more, Mom. I want to be part of this."